What if the mirror in your hallway isn't just reflecting light, but keeping something trapped inside? In the winter of 1924, a Boston antique dealer sold a heavy dark glass mirror dating back to 1780. 3 days later, the prominent local buyer returned it. The man was pale, trembling, and refused to touch the frame, claiming that the reflection showed a heavy, iron-bound door in his study that did not exist in reality. Within a month, the antique shop was permanently boarded up by local authorities. The entire inventory of pre-1880 mirrors was confiscated under the cover of night, and the dealer himself vanished entirely from the public record. The official medical reports from the State Health Board declared that the antique shop was a localized hazard. They stated that the degrading quicksilver on the back of the ancient mirrors was releasing lethal concentrations of mercury vapor into the air. The resulting heavy metal poisoning had simply caused mass hysteria, paranoia, and shared visual hallucinations among the clientele. In the early 20th century, this explanation made perfect, rational sense. Mercury drove men mad. It was a known scientific fact, a brutal consequence of the industrial age. But the true mystery of this case does not lie in the sudden closure of the shop. It lies in the terrifying consistency of the symptoms, the disproportionate, militarized speed of the confiscation, and the disturbing reality of what the customers actually reported seeing in the glass. To understand how an entire lot of mirrors could become the subject of a localized government cover-up, one must first understand the history of reflection itself. The mirrors we use today, bright, perfectly clear, and flawless, are a relatively modern invention. In 1835, a German chemist discovered a method for applying a microscopic layer of pure silver to a sheet of glass. It revolutionized the world, providing a cheap, perfectly accurate reflection. But before 1835, mirrors were made very differently, and they possessed a very different soul. For centuries, the finest mirrors were created using a highly toxic, painstakingly slow process known as tin mercury amalgam. Artisans would lay down a thin sheet of pure tin foil, coat it in liquid mercury, and carefully slide a plate of heavy glass over the top, pressing the toxic metals together for weeks until they bonded. The resulting reflection was fundamentally different from modern silvered glass. It was darker. It possessed a deep, liquid quality, often shifting with a subtle metallic bluish-gray tint. These mirrors did not just bounce light back at the viewer. They seemed to absorb it, holding the shadows of a room deep within their heavy frames. By the early 1920s, these old amalgam mirrors were considered dark, archaic curiosities. But for a select group of wealthy collectors in Boston, they were highly coveted. And Silas Mercer was the only dealer left in New England who specialized exclusively in them. Silas Mercer was a quiet, meticulous man. His shop, tucked away in a narrow, forgotten cobblestone alley near the harbor, smelled permanently of beeswax, old paper, and coal dust. He was a purist. He despised the bright, shallow reflection of modern silvered glass. He believed that the old methods captured something essential about the spaces they inhabited. And in the late autumn of 1923, Mercer acquired the crown jewels of his career, a complete, perfectly preserved set of 9 large, floor-standing amalgam mirrors. According to his surviving fragmented ledgers, Mercer had purchased the entire lot from the estate of a long-abandoned manor in rural Massachusetts, a property that had been sealed since the late 18th century. The mirrors were stunning. The glass was incredibly thick, rippled with the slight imperfections of hand-blown panes, and backed with a dense, perfectly intact layer of tin and mercury. Mercer cleaned them, polished their heavy oak frames, and placed them in his showroom. By the end of November, he had sold the first 3. The first Anomaly was reported exactly 1 week later. Eleanor Vance, the wealthy widow of a shipping magnate, had purchased one of the tall mirrors for the grand parlor of her home. She was a woman of high social standing, known for her sharp mind and absolute pragmatism. But on the morning of December 4th, she sent her carriage driver to Mercer's shop with a strange, frantic letter. She wrote that the mirror was flawed. During the daylight hours, the reflection of her parlor was perfectly normal, albeit cast in the dark, heavy tint characteristic of the ancient amalgam. But at night, illuminated only by the dim, flickering light of her fireplace, the reflection began to change. She reported that the geometry of the room inside the glass no longer matched her actual parlor. The angles of the ceiling in the reflection appeared subtly sloped, extending further back than the physical walls allowed. The heavy velvet curtains in her home were burgundy, but the curtains in the reflection appeared entirely devoid of color, hanging like heavy shrouds. But the most disturbing detail, the reason she demanded Mercer remove the mirror from her home immediately, was the doorway. Eleanor's parlor had 2 exits, but the room in the reflection had 3. In the dark corner of the reflected room, perfectly aligned behind where she would sit in her reading chair, was a heavy arched wooden door bound in black iron. She swore in her letter that she had watched the handle of this reflected door slowly turn over the course of 3 nights. Mercer assumed it was a trick of the light. The thick, wavy glass of ancient mirrors often distorted architecture, creating optical illusions in low light. He quietly repurchased the mirror, dismissing the widow's claims as the hysterical imagination of a lonely woman living in an oversized house. But then the second mirror was returned. This one had been purchased by Thomas Sterling, a prominent local architect. Sterling was a man defined by mathematics, structure, and physical reality. He had placed the heavy amalgam glass at the end of a long windowless hallway in his townhouse. Sterling did not write a letter. He arrived at Mercer's shop in person, deeply agitated, demanding a refund. As an architect, his mind was trained to recognize structural anomalies instantly. He brought with him a series of frantic charcoal sketches he had drawn while observing the mirror. He told Mercer that the reflection was defying the basic laws of physics. The hallway in the glass stretched far deeper than the physical dimensions of his home, and in the deep background of the reflection, standing at the end of the extended, shadowed corridor, was an arched wooden door bound in heavy iron. Sterling reported that the door in the glass was not fully closed. It was ajar by perhaps 2 inches, revealing a space of absolute, impenetrable darkness beyond it. He told Mercer that if he stood in the hallway and listened closely to the heavy glass, he could hear a low, rhythmic sound coming from the space beyond the reflected door. It sounded like the slow, deep exhalation of a massive lung. By the first week of January 1924, Mercer had sold 6 of the 9 mirrors. Within 14 days, every single one of them had been returned. The reports were chillingly identical. The buyers were unconnected. They ran in different social circles, lived in different neighborhoods, and possessed vastly different temperaments. Yet every single customer described the exact same impossible architecture. They all saw the heavy iron-bound door. They all noted the strange, elongated geometry of the reflected rooms. And most terrifyingly, the last 3 customers reported that the door in the glass was opening wider. The breaking point occurred on the evening of January 22nd. A highly respected circuit court judge had purchased the final mirror. He was a man of the law, grounded entirely in evidence and fact. He had the mirror placed in his private study. When he failed to arrive at the courthouse for 3 consecutive days, local police were dispatched to his residence to conduct a welfare check. The official police report from that evening is a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. The officers noted that the front door was unlocked. The house was entirely silent. When they breached the private study, they found the room plunged into absolute darkness, save for a single, dying oil lamp resting on the floor. The judge was seated in a heavy leather chair, positioned directly in front of the ancient mirror. He was entirely unresponsive. His eyes were locked, wide and unblinking, on the dark, shifting surface of the amalgam glass. The police noted that the room felt unnaturally cold, and the air carried a heavy metallic scent that tasted like old copper on the tongue. The judge never spoke another coherent word. He was committed to a private sanitarium 3 days later, his mind completely and irreparably shattered. The only phrase he repeatedly muttered to the medical staff was a frantic, whispered warning about what was stepping out of the dark hallway. The next morning, the Boston Board of Health descended on Silas Mercer's antique shop. They did not arrive with medical bags or clipboards. They arrived with heavy iron chains, thick padlocks, and a full detail of armed city police. The street was immediately cordoned off. The official explanation was swiftly disseminated to the local papers. Silas Mercer had been operating a dangerously unregulated shop. The 9 mirrors he had acquired were severely degraded. The ancient tin mercury amalgam was flaking, turning into a highly concentrated toxic dust that had contaminated his shop and the homes of his buyers. The diagnosis was heavy metal poisoning. The medical board explained that mercury vapor is a potent neurotoxin. It directly attacks the central nervous system, causing profound psychological distress, paranoia, and severe visual and auditory hallucinations. The shared nature of the visions, the door, the altered rooms, was explained away as the power of suggestion, a localized hysteria spread by rumors among the Boston elite. It is an incredibly comforting, perfectly rational explanation. It neatly wraps a terrifying phenomenon in the safe, sterile language of early 20th century medical science. But when you look closer at the archival records, the official story begins to violently fracture. If this was a simple case of toxic exposure, the standard protocol in 1924 was to quarantine the affected materials, ventilate the property, and fine the owner. But the authorities did not ventilate Silas Mercer's shop. They sealed it completely. Furthermore, the physical effects of severe mercury poisoning, known historically as Mad Hatter disease, are well documented. It causes profound tremors, loss of motor control, bleeding gums, and disorganized, chaotic delirium. The hallucinations associated with heavy metal toxicity are random, deeply personal, and highly varied. Mercury poisoning does not cause 6 unconnected, highly educated individuals to hallucinate the exact same architectural anomaly. A neurotoxin cannot synchronize the human imagination. It cannot make an architect, a widow, and a judge all see the same iron-bound door opening in the exact same manner over a period of weeks. The most disturbing contradiction, however, lies in the fate of the mirrors themselves. If the amalgam backing was simply degrading and releasing toxic dust, the safest and most standard method of disposal would have been to smash the glass, bury the heavy frames in a local landfill, and burn the remains. But according to the meticulously kept, though heavily redacted, municipal shipping logs from February 1924, the mirrors were not destroyed. On the night of February 12th, under the cover of a heavy winter storm, a team of men wearing heavy canvas respirators entered the sealed shop. They did not carry sledgehammers. They carried heavy, custom-built wooden shipping crates packed with thick layers of industrial felt. The logs indicate that the 9 mirrors were painstakingly crated, loaded onto an unmarked reinforced freight truck, and transported to the private rail yards on the edge of the city. From there, the crates were loaded onto a midnight train bound for a federal storage facility in the deep interior of the country. The final destination was never recorded. Silas Mercer was never arrested, nor was he ever treated for the heavy metal poisoning he supposedly endured while working in the shop. His banking records show a massive single deposit made by an untraceable municipal trust the day after his shop was seized. After that, his paper trail simply ends. He packed his bags and vanished into the vast expanse of the American landscape, taking the true origin of the mirrors with him. Independent researchers who have dug into the fractured history of New England glassmaking have theorized about the true nature of the mirrors. They point to the isolation of the 18th century estate where Mercer found them. They suggest that the artisan who cast that specific batch of amalgam did not just use tin and quicksilver. They suggest that in the dark, isolated corners of early America, there were those who understood that a mirror is not merely a piece of polished metal. Under the right conditions, with the right chemical composition, a mirror is a boundary. It is a thin, fragile membrane separating the physical world from the spaces that exist entirely in the negative, inverted architecture of reflection. Why would a local health board bypass their own municipal destruction? Protocols to carefully crate and ship toxic glass across the country on a private train? Why did they need to silence an antique dealer with a payout large enough to buy his permanent disappearance? The reaction to Silas Mercer's mirrors was not a standard public health response. It was a reaction of panic. It was a highly organized operation designed to secure and conceal a set of objects that defied the fundamental physics of the modern world. The men who organized the midnight train did not care about heavy metal poisoning. They cared about the door. They looked at the dark, heavy amalgam glass, and they realized that whatever was turning the iron handle on the other side of the reflection was slowly pushing its way into our world. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Silas Mercer was just a careless man who poisoned his wealthiest clients with degrading Victorian glass, and the government simply overreacted to a severe, localized health crisis. Maybe the identical visions of the iron door were just a bizarre psychological coincidence, a shared nightmare born of toxic air and the eerie, dark distortion of ancient metal. Or maybe the people who lived through it saw something we no longer recognize. Maybe the mirrors in our homes today are made of bright, shallow, silvered glass for a very specific reason. Not because it is cheaper or clearer, but because the old way of making glass, the deep, dark, heavy way, didn't just reflect the room. It reflected what was waiting just outside of it. If you believe the official story of heavy metal poisoning, tell me why the mirrors were never destroyed. And if you think you've ever seen something move in the dark corners of your own mirror, write one word below: glass.